Where the devil cannot rest his head, he rests his tail.
A few years ago, there was an entity or a shadow person haunting my girlfriend's apartment, her mum's apartment, and a friend of ours across the parking lot's apartment. It would haunt all three places. At night, we would look across the parking lot and see a shadow figure standing in the window. We would call our neighbor on the phone and she would check it out and see nothing in the window, but we can still see it standing there. When it would haunt Jenny's apartment, my ex-girlfriend, it would be a flash of black across the wall like it was running from room to room. This was the time I was meditating a lot and trying to have an out-of-body experience. Eventually, I got my wish. Twice. Coming face to face with a demon, but that will be another time I tell you that experience of mine. I lived about 6 miles away from my girlfriend's apartment. Me and Jenny's attitudes were changing frequently, always arguing, obviously making this creature stronger. It's at night time me and Jenny are in bed, with her little toy poodle named Fancy sleeping. Next thing I know, I wake up and the back of my head and neck gets really stiff and starts to vibrate and shake. My head lifts up without my control. Jenny feels this and she sees it. It frightens her. She just holds me and tells me it's going to be okay, over and over until it's stopped. I hold her and tell her I'm okay. What are you doing? She says, "Your head was shaking. I thought you were having a seizure." I told her, "No, everything's fine. Go back to sleep." I knew everything was not all right, but I didn't know what that was. A few nights go by and I'm at my house, on the phone with Jenny, and out of nowhere we start to argue again over nothing. I feel like this creature was purposely making us fight. But anyway, I get off the phone with her. Things change for the worse here. The back of my head and neck start to get stiff and vibrate again, uncontrollably. My head tilted to the side, all stiff. I can't control it. Next thing I know, my vision blurs and my eyesight gets pushed back, like I zoom out into a deep tunnel. I see this black mist coming towards me. It goes inside of me and I can feel him, this creature, everywhere. But the worst part of it all is that I cannot control my own body. I storm out of my house, into the night, this thing controlling my body. I'm panicking on the inside. I know every intention this creature wants to do. It wants to go to Jenny's apartment and murder her, basically. It is pitch black outside. I live in the country. There's woods everywhere. This creature is forcing me to walk this road in the middle of the night towards my girlfriend's apartment. I can feel his thoughts, his emotions. It is horrible. Now, what gets worse is that the entire time my body and us get closer to her apartment, the more animalistic he acts. I'm terrified. I'm stuck inside my own body. He starts speaking in a language I have never heard before, while slobbering and spitting all over the place and growling out of my own mouth. Almost each car that passed me by slows down, close enough to see, then they would race down the road, away from me, trying to get away. By their reactions, it frightened me more. I believe those people driving by also saw my eyes were completely black and slobbering like a rabid dog. I begin walking closer and closer to her place, trying to gain control over my body. It is not working. As I am walking down the road, I listen to him talk. It is not my voice. It is not language on this earth. I'm panicking more and more because we are close, about 200 yards from her place. I'm begging for somebody to help me. I walk past the cowboy church. Maybe Pastor Zach can help me, if he sees me. I walk by the church. Nobody's there. Another church about 50 more yards up ahead, on the left. People are there. It is open. I could hear them congregating and worshipping Jesus Christ. I know miracles in Jesus do exist, because the second I walk past the parking lot of that second church, I can feel this creature get ripped out of me. It takes all the air out of my lungs. I fall to the ground on my knees, gasping for air. I vomit. After I collect myself, I look around. I look ahead, and I realize I was about 80 yards from Jenny's apartment. I start to cry, bawling my eyes out, almost puking again. I can't believe what almost happened. I can't believe I was possessed. I turn around and run the whole 6 miles back to my house, crying. This is a true story and it haunts me to this day. I've never told Jenny, and I think I never will. Let me know what you think. Hi there. Sorry for any grammatical mistakes. English is not my native language. This incident happened to me in August 2017. After completing my school, I went to the college in a new city and lived in a boys' hostel/dormitory. There was a guy, let's call him T. He was my roommate. When we first met, I had a weird feeling about him, but I thought maybe I'm being paranoid, as this is my first day here. That university has quite a large campus area, and there were rumors that some places on the campus are paranormal. The most famous paranormal spot was behind a restaurant building. The spot was given the nickname Screaming Corridor. People used to say that they hear screams there at night. So back to the roommate. He was weird since the beginning, and I didn't like him at all. And we both were enrolled in different courses. So I knew there was no way I could get along with this guy. So I started hanging out a lot with the boys of my class. I used to stay in their room for a whole day at night. But one day, around 1 a.m., T called me and said he is afraid of the dark. He can't sleep alone, and he wants me to come back to the room. I used to be afraid of the dark when I was a kid. I almost wet my pants a lot of times when I was a kid. So I thought, maybe he has the same problem which I used to have. So I went back to the room, and we played a multiplayer mobile game for 2 hours, and then turned off the lights. After a few minutes, I woke up to a strange noise. When I looked around, I realized that it was my roommate. He was shaking and bouncing his legs while sleeping. It was both weird and scary at the same time. It happened for more than 2 weeks. He used to call me at night and said that he's afraid of the dark, and when lights are turned off, he used to shake his legs. One day he called me as usual, and we were playing chess. I asked him about his weird leg shaking, whether he has a medical condition or something else, but he said nothing. After a few days, I again woke up to the sounds of his pounding legs. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. So I started using my phone. Suddenly, T started laughing. It was super scary. I shook him violently and he woke up. I asked him again, "What the hell is wrong with you, man?" He gave me a weird half smile for a minute and said,
I love Screaming Corridor.
I rushed towards the door and went out of the room. I stayed in my friend's room that night. A few days later, I was sleeping and then suddenly woke up and realized T was laughing like a lunatic. I turned on the lights and saw he was standing in front of the door and looked at me and said,
Want to go to the Screaming Corridor, buddy?
I just stood there for a minute and then told him to let me go out of the room. But he said no. I punched him in the face. He stumbled and I opened the door and ran to my friend's room and told him everything. I stayed in his room and we filed a complaint, and T was kicked out of the dormitory and my friend moved into my room. But he never told anyone the reason of doing this. About 20 years ago, my family and I lived in the most awful house I've ever come across. I'll probably post more stories about it, but this one was by far the most terrifying. My brother, 2 at the time, was very premature and delayed in general development. At that age, he was walking but not well, and couldn't really talk well. He was also tiny and couldn't reach anything higher than maybe 3 feet off the ground. All of the bedrooms were at the end of a long hallway in a kind of U shape. 2 brothers shared to the left. I was directly at the end, parents to the right, and then baby brother and sister shared a room just before the parents' room, also on the right. So other than the baby's room, our doors were basically next to each other. One night, at around 2 a.m, we wake up to someone shuffling down the hallway, because all haunted houses are also creepy, of course. And baby brother is just standing in our parents' doorway. Mum asks, "Harry, is that you?" And he takes a few steps into the room. She turns on the bedside lamp, and there's 2-year-old brother holding a butcher's knife from the knife block in the kitchen. He grins and says, "Sorry, I have to kill you now." Needless to say, all of the doors between the kitchen and the bedrooms are locked after that, and nobody sleeps for the rest of the night. 2 important notes. There's absolutely no way he could have gotten up onto the kitchen bench to retrieve a knife at his size. And that was the most coherent sentence he had ever spoken, or would speak, for at least another 18 months. We moved not too long after. I'll start off with explaining my family and living situation. My wife and I have 3 children, her daughter who is 7, my son who is 9, and her son who is 10. We don't have any children together. My wife and I share a bedroom. Her daughter has her own room, and our boys share a room with a bunk bed. Her son sleeps on the bottom bunk and my son sleeps on the top bunk. All 3 of them are with us full time and visit their other parents every other weekend. My son has always had some behavioral issues that stemmed from us living with my parents for some time, and the things they allowed him to get away with when they were watching him. I feel as if I'm also to blame for some of his issues because I'm not a super loving, affectionate person, and I believe that every child needs that from their parents. When my wife and I first started dating, my son got along great with her 2 children, aside from some jealousy or selfishness traits that come from being an only child. But as the relationship progressed, the 2 boys started butting heads a bit more. For the first few weeks, my son has been calling my stepson an idiot multiple times a day. He gets in trouble for doing this, and when asked why he chose to call names, he says he doesn't know and tears up like he's confused. He's also been staring/glaring at my wife with a blank expression that makes her feel extremely uncomfortable, and he's also lunged at her a few times in a threatening manner. My son has never done these things before, and it just seems like it started to happen out of nowhere. We have him in counseling and are working to resolve these issues. Before I get into explaining the events that we experienced last night, I want to explain the one previous experience we had in our bedroom. My wife and I were laying in bed one night. I was asleep and she was awake. She started nudging me, which woke me up, and told me that she was seeing a shadow figure in the corner of our bedroom. I looked and didn't see it at first, but as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could see it as well. It was a dark, translucent figure that stood maybe 5.5 to 6 feet tall, and it was just standing in the corner of our bedroom. We stared at it for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and it started to fade away until it disappeared completely. Neither of us felt threatened or unsafe, but we were definitely creeped out. That was about 2 years ago, and we haven't had anything else happen until last night. Fast forward to last night. We were playing a video game online, Call of Duty, with my sister, her boyfriend, and a couple of their friends. It was around 7:30 and I started to feel dizzy and nauseous, so I told her I was going to head to bed. She woke me up around 9:30 to smoke a cigarette with her, but I started to feel dizzy and nauseous again, so I headed back to bed. I laid there for a while, unable to sleep, and started to get cold chills and goosebumps and had an uneasy feeling. My wife came to bed around 11 and fell asleep pretty quickly, but I was still unable to sleep. I laid in bed for what I assume was about half an hour and started to hear thumping and tapping around the house. Some noises were in our bedroom. Some sounded like they came from the kitchen, some from the kids' bedrooms. I then heard what sounded like one of our kids walk down the hallway and into the hallway bathroom and slam the door. I thought that was odd because none of our kids slam doors, and they usually don't wake up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I started to hear light talking, whispering almost, and then I heard a female voice say, "My name, do you want to go do that thing?" I thought it was my wife asking me to go smoke, so I tempted to roll over and ask her why, but I was unable to move or talk. I started to think I was experiencing sleep paralysis, which I've never had before, but I knew that I was definitely awake. I thought about some things I've read on Reddit and other places online about commanding spirits and entities to leave my home, leave me alone, etc. I was finally able to say, "Leave me alone," and when I did, I saw a flash of light in our bedroom window and saw something drop from about shoulder height onto the floor, which made a loud thump sound. It reminded me of someone dropping a cell phone or TV remote. I started to freak out, but was finally able to move, so I shook my wife's arm and woke her up. I had her turn on her phone light, and nothing was there. I got up and turned on our bedroom light and started looking for whatever was dropped, and once again, nothing was there. I explained what happened to my wife, and she was obviously scared at this point. We laid in bed for a few minutes and started to hear thumping noises coming from the boys' room, where all three of our children were sleeping. So I got up, turned their light on and checked on them, but they were all asleep. I laid back in bed, and a few minutes later we heard something fall in the boys' bedroom again. I got up, turned the light back on and saw that a book had fallen off the top bunk onto the floor. But the book was open, face down on the floor. Think of it as an A, with the spine facing up and the 4 pages of the book touching the floor. The books were about 2 inches away from his feet, at the foot of his bed, so I didn't think he would have been able to knock either of them off. Her 2 children woke up when I was about to leave the room and followed me to our bedroom, so we let them sleep on the floor. I must have fallen back asleep, but a few minutes later I awoke to my wife hyperventilating, and she said that she had looked to the same corner of our room and saw the figure again, but this time it was standing over her 2 children in the middle of the room. I looked, but I couldn't see it, and she said it had vanished again. We heard a few more thumps and thuds throughout the night, but nothing else happened that I would consider extreme. My wife seems to think something may have attached to or possessed my son, taking his behavior into account. And I'm scared for the safety of my son and my family in general. Our neighbor is the pastor of our local church. I'm going to speak with him after work tonight to see if he is willing to come bless our house and see what his thoughts are. But at this time, we are scared to go back to our home because of what happened last night. This is a long one. I've had some strange, scary, inexplicable things happen to me in my childhood, but this event will forever haunt my existence. I was 13 years old at the time, now 25, female, when my best friend, we'll call her Sarah, and 2 other boys in our grade decided to hang out in town. We grew up in a small town in New Jersey where there wasn't much to do besides hang out at local parks and such in the area. We decide to walk to this one park on a lake that sits at the bottom of a large wooded hill. On top of the hill is a cemetery. It was broad daylight, early afternoon time, so being young and dumb, we decided to take a walk through the cemetery and thought nothing of it. My best friend was wiping off debris from tombstones and monuments in an effort to respect the dead. We were reading the gravestones and speaking aloud the names of the deceased individuals. It was actually really peaceful. The four of us decided to sit on a patch of grass a little ways away from the graves to relax after walking around. We naturally sat in a circle formation, and Sarah was next to me to my left. We were engaged in conversation when I suddenly noticed Sarah had gone really quiet. I looked over at her, and she was staring off into nothing. I immediately asked her if she was okay, and she sort of snapped out of it and said yes, she's fine. A minute or so later, she was staring into space, and she covered her ears. I asked what was going on, and she said, "I can't hear. They're screaming at us." Now I'm terrified, and I ask who is screaming. She doesn't respond and starts to rock back and forth. My heart is beating out of my chest. I call her name again, and I instinctively throw my cell phone, a bulky NV2, right at her head, and she didn't even flinch. She rocked back and forth for a few more seconds before looking down into her lap. She then looks up at me with the most evil, demonic smile. Her face was fixed in an expression I've never seen her make, and so it didn't even look like her face. Immediately, I knew she was possessed. This was my absolute worst nightmare come true, and I was terrified to my core. There are no words to describe the overwhelming amount of fear that consumed me. My fight or flight response kicked in, and I just blacked out. I came to a few seconds later and found myself about 100 feet away from her and the boys. She was still staring at me, smiling, completely still, not even blinking. I was screaming and crying her name, and I was frozen with fear. She finally broke her demonic gaze from me, looked back into her lap, got up and ran away, right into the woods. It took me a few seconds to unfreeze, and I came to the realization that she was in danger. I needed to go after her. I ran and grabbed my cell phone and followed her into the woods down the hill and to the park area where I found her sitting on a swing. I approach her and ask if she's okay. She is extremely disorientated and asks, "Where are we? We need to stay. We need to go back." I said, "No, we're not staying. We need to get the hell out of here." I literally have to drag this girl out of the park. The park and the cemetery are located on Native American grounds. There were a group of people at the park for a cultural event who asked us if we were okay and if one of us had screamed. I just said yes, it was me, but everything is fine. When we got out of there, we all just had a moment of silence. Sarah did not remember anything that happened. She said she remembers sitting down with us on the grass, and she remembered the voices screaming at us, and that they were telling us to leave. Then, she said she felt like she was having a nightmare and was dreaming of what she assumed to be hell, because there was fire everywhere. She didn't recall saying she wanted to stay in the park, or being dragged out. The boys were speechless, and didn't really have much to add. From that day on, I would have demonic nightmares 4 to 7 nights a week until my freshman year of college. The nightmares would always involve a possession or extremely dense, heavy air that signified a demonic presence. I was always weighed down by the energy and could barely get away in time when in my dream I realized the demon was present. I'm still friends with this girl to this day, and we have only mentioned it a handful of times. My logic was if I ignored it or didn't speak it into existence, it would go away. Eventually it did. Once in a great while, I will get the nightmares. To this day, I can't help but wonder if I was haunted by the demon after the incident, or if it was just some severe PTSD. No one that I've shared this with could ever relate to my experience. If anyone listening to this can, I would love to hear about it. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. Although a lot of people may have experienced ghost encounters, rarely do you have such a close proximity with someone who is demonically possessed. My brother, someone whom I thought could never be the one I fear of, had gone through a series of demonic possessions recently. It's quite lucky that it doesn't happen anymore. It all began with the weird behavior, shutting himself out in the room, coming home late, and being quite an antisocial person. All of a sudden, my family was thrown into disarray by the most unexpected incidents that we thought we could have never experienced, considering how pious my parents are. It happened during May and June. He first started passing out suddenly in school. The school thought it was just a health problem, but then it grew a little bit worse, with my brother suddenly staring blankly and not seeming to hear what the others were trying to tell him. Finally, he started passing out and then waking up to be something else, mumbling and muttering in a totally different language. He would thrash around wildly, and the school, being so dumb and not professional, called the ambulance, who of course weren't in the right capacity to do anything about it. It kept happening. All the time in school, him passing out and going hysterical. His eyes would be open and bloodshot, and he had tried to strangle his teacher as well as his friends. He could shove away many people holding him. He was unusually strong, and he would speak in a foreign language, half like some Buddha chanting, and half like something animal-like, hissing and growling. We brought him home many times, but it rarely happened there. He could not remember what happened, except that before he blacked out, he said he could hear a distant laughing and drums beating, which came nearer and nearer, and finally he would feel giddy and pass out. During the period when it all went berserk and worse, my brother would continuously day after day pass out. My mother would sleep in his bedroom, and she once told me that she woke up one night because she couldn't sleep well, and she saw this dark figure standing by his bedside. She called out. She thought it was him, but it disappeared the moment she saw it. One morning my school started late, and so did my sister's. We were alone as my mother had gone to buy some groceries. I bathed and kept having this bad feeling that he would start suddenly. When I came out of the bathroom, the phone rang. Just when I was about to pick it up, I heard some deep growling in his bedroom, and I froze immediately. I tiptoed to his bedroom and saw him thrashing around in his bed wildly. We tried reading some holy verses, and it seemed to grow worse. It was the last straw. We called up a friend of my mother's for help. We spent a lot of money and time then. It was quite a waste, and it never seemed to help. It grew worse, and he would be flung against the wall and would grow hysterical when we went for religious classes, especially when he heard the call for prayer. Even when his friends and all sat on him, he threw them off and started punching at everyone. These incidents happened regularly and repeatedly. We were so afraid that it would continue for a long time. He would suddenly shut himself in the room and scream and throw tantrums. The door to his room would suddenly close, and he would keep saying that he saw 3 women, all ugly and fiery, laughing at him. These women had long hair and vampire-like teeth and were all naked, as so described by him. He even dreamt of them. It would also happen in the hospital whenever the school sent him there. During the evening, around 7+, he would suddenly become another person. He would talk in a low growl and describe the 3 women. It seemed like he was possessed by a lot of things. He would hiss and tell his story with his deep breathing. We called in Ustaz, and he managed to make some things go away. Even though that he was still acting strange, and it was now that it didn't seem to happen anymore. He was said to be possessed by some animal and Buddhist ghost. The animal was some alien-looking thingy with vampire-like teeth, and we knew how it looked because he drew it. He was into witchcraft. He got interested after watching Buffy and the Craft and Charmed, and used the internet to look for incantations and spells, practicing it and calling out for them. He thought it was harmless, but now he knew he was wrong. We found the many verses and spells among his school notes and papers. We threw them away the moment we found them. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching.
As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below. So feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.